Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're talking to Dr. Kaja Franck, a PhD in English literature who has spent most of her academic life studying werewolves and vampires. How are you, Kaja?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Just so, well, I'm not going to say whether you want to tell people or not, but you're heavily pregnant and you're in lockdown. What does that mean for people heavily pregnant in lockdown?
It's actually, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm also, just to add fun to it, I'm also a high risk pregnancy because I'm carrying twins. But basically, it doesn't really mean a huge amount. I go for my walks and I go to hospital every 4 weeks for another scan. So it hasn't really affected. I still get to get the medical care I need and require, so it hasn't really affected that. So overall, it just gives me a really good excuse to be very, very lazy and eat lots of food.
Well, there you go. And I mean, it's not like you're going to go for a jog any day soon, is there? So your exercise opportunities are probably limited at the moment.
Uh,
Okay. Well, the reason we're talking today is that a couple of days ago it was Bram Stoker's 108th anniversary of his death, and it got me to thinking about the impact that Dracula has had on society, and also got me thinking about vampires in general. I want to ask you, Kaya, is Dracula the perfect vampire?
oh, that is such a good question. So for my money, Dracula is not going to be my perfect vampire because every single person has the vampire that they love the most. And I think the thing about Dracula is he's so important and the text is so important. It's kind of perfect in the way that it's impacted on my studies, the cultural reverberations that Dracula has had, especially in terms of adaptations of Dracula. Um, but I have to admit, I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit younger. I'm only 33, so I'm into paranormal romance vampires. So I'd like my perfect vampire to be slightly hunkier and more attractive, and slightly more distraught about their own evilness. So think sort of Angel, and then Spike in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Dracula. He's got so many wonderful things going for him. He's not massively cool. He hasn't quite got that down yet. You can't see him going into a club and all eyes turning on him. But I think the where Dracula has such an impact is that if I was to ask anyone in the street, tell me about Dracula, most likely they're thinking of their favourite version of Dracula, not
Yeah.
necessarily. So he speaks to so many people, but for me, he's not the perfect vampire. I have to admit, but the text itself might be one of the best vampire narratives.
Because I think when you're right in saying that people have their different version of Dracula, they're thinking about the films, aren't they? Because there's rarely a Dracula on screen that represents what we see when we read the book. Everything from Gary Oldman as the sort of the weirdy kind of, with the hair back and looking very, very stylized, all the way to sort of like Christopher Lee with the cape and the just what we see there. Do you think that there's ever been or could be a portrayal of Dracula on film that would be like the book?
Well, I have to admit, I'd say absolutely no, because every time you read a book, that's the wonder about literature. When you read a book, what you imagine in your head is not the same as what anyone else can capture. And that's why you have people who are so avidly against or pro certain adaptations, because they have what they see in their own head. And if that's challenged in any way, it can feel incredibly uncomfortable. It's like a disconnect between what you imagined and what you actually see. And in other ways, I also think that when we're just thinking more broadly about adaptations, I've seen adaptations of novels where they're very, very, very close to the novel, and somehow they're very joyless and boring
Mm.
because different mediums need different ways of storytelling. And a good adaptation looks at the text and goes, this is the way that I'm looking at it, or this is what we're drawing on, this is how we're setting it, this is how we're changing it. So I actually think that if you try to do an exact like for like, as close as possible to text, you'd end up something with quite dry almost, and that actually misses um, it misses the joy of the text, which is that there are mistakes in there. There is a reason why we keep studying it for so long, because every time you reread it, something else comes through. And I'm not sure that can happen if you do an adaptation where we're like trying to do an exact copy.
What did you think of the most recent version, or the newest adaptation, which we got on New Year's Day? Stephen Moffat and
Get it.
Gattis's version of Dracula with Claire Bangs.
Oh, well, I think like the actor who played Dracula was fabulous. I thought he was really, really, really good. Um, I've had lots of debates with people because I've had a lot of people who have just outright absolutely hated it. And when you actually dig a little further, it's because they just have a major issue with Moffat and Gatiss,
Yeah.
which is absolutely fine. But I'm not a huge Doctor Who fan. I'm definitely more in the sort of gothic realm of things. So I went in there going, yes, they will have certain ticks that they have in all the things that they produce. But I personally enjoyed it a lot. I think the entire episode on the ship was amazing. I thought it was really, really, really good. Um, I felt the last episode is probably the weakest, where it jumps up to the new world. But I just loved that it was a bit campy and fun. I have no problem with things being campy and fun, and certainly Dracula and Gothic horror lends itself to the camp and the over the top. And I also felt that Agnes was just absolutely amazing.
She was fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is where we sort of, with anything, like I thought the first episode was absolutely brilliant, which would stand alone as a film on itself. I thought it was just beyond genius, the first episode. The second one on the boat, meh, I wasn't, it was all right, but it didn't. And the third one I thought was great. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was, fun, as you say. So there was joy in it. People were, you were looking for little bits and all that kind of stuff. So we could all enjoy it, and I think that's the main thing I liked about that. I don't quite understand sometimes when people attack these versions as, when their favorite version is, say, Hammer's Dracula, which has got nothing at all to do almost with the original novel. You'll have people that'll argue, that is the perfect version of Dracula is Christopher Lee in Dracula 1958, but you've got Jonathan Harker in there as almost a spy who's coming to destroy Dracula, which has nothing to do with the book. I got to think of something interesting to say now.
Well, I was.
Wait. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was thinking the thing. You're absolutely right. This is again why the novel's so important, because it lends itself to adaptations. So the Hammer versions, I mean, what they do is they go, yeah, all that stuff that was obviously about sex in the novel, that the Victorians would never have acknowledged was obviously about sex in the novel. Let's just really obviously make this about sex. And that's really, like, I think Christopher Lee's Dracula oozes sex appeal. And that's really brought to the forefront. And it's great. He's absolutely wonderful at what he does. But again, people become quite attached to their particular vampire, and the need to sort of denigrate or attack any other adaptations I find particularly interesting, because it kind of shows how much we're not appreciating the novel for what it is. And the novel is something that can hold multiple adaptations. There are not many novels that could have been adapted, and not many characters that could have been adapted and reinvented as often as Dracula has been, without very quickly becoming incredibly boring. And yet we have almost every single decade since the novel came out, there is a version of Dracula, and it will speak to that particular generation, and that actor will be their Dracula. I think, I love Pride and Prejudice. There's been 2 adaptations I've watched, and I think I'm done. That's all right. That's fine. I've got it. But with Dracula, I will always look forward to the next adaptation and see what people have gone for.
So while we say there's no Dracula is not a perfect vampire, because people have their own ideas of what a vampire is, and you go for more the Robert Pattinson sulky teenager dweeby types, to the the version of Clay Bang, who was much more sort of masculine, sort of, heartthrob type style. I've just forgotten I'm having a moment here. I can't think of what I'm supposed to be saying. Let me think. Sorry, I do this sometimes when I'm trying to talk on these things. I usually just let people talk and then then cut at the end. So what we're basically saying is that we're never going to get a perfect Dracula or a perfect vampire, because people have all their own views of that. We're never going to have our own perfect Dracula. So for you, though, what would be your perfect Dracula vampire type of story? And it's all personal. So for you, who's read so much vampire literature over the years, if you could, make a perfect one, how would you do it?
Well, they would definitely be attractive. And by the way, you sound just like my therapist here, who the other day had a whole conversation with me as to why have you always liked vampires? Let's talk about what that means to you. So I was really influenced by Interview with the Vampire, the film, which I watched when I was very, very young. And then Buffy the Vampire Slayer came out. So you need, for me, it's attractive. There has to be a self-awareness. I can't deal with mindless sort of vampires. I don't think I'd have really got on with the very, very early versions of vampires that you see, sort of like stories about in the 1700s and the 1600s.
Yeah.
So they have to be attractive, they have to be self-aware, highly educated. The biggest appeal of vampires for me is that they can just keep going back to university. But the other thing is, I think there needs to be, I'm really interested in the tension between, if you are a being that has lived for a very, very long time, how do you acknowledge the fact that you're also living in the modern world? I find that tension and that need to keep reinventing particularly interesting. There has to be, I think if I really wanted to do well, they have to also suck blood and they have to kill humans, because the interest is that tension between, you appear to be, in inverted commas, civilized, you can hold a conversation, you're self-aware, you're attractive, you can fit in anywhere, and then you also kill, and you kill humans.
Yeah.
I would say, therefore, that that's one of the reasons why I sort of like Spike so much in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. For me, he would probably be the vampire that I find most interesting and exciting, because he is evil, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have human qualities, like being able to fall in love.
Yeah.
So I'd be looking for a mixture of all those sort of things, and also a really cool place to hang out, like, a mansion or a really sleek, cool-looking apartment. I can't get down with anyone living in anything too grotty or grubby. I definitely feel that nowadays vampires should have some good investments in terms of retail and so forth.
Yeah. So essentially, you want the aristocrat of the novel, but with a little less jerk-like, because Dracula was a jerk, basically. The conversations he's having with Jonathan Harker, basically, look how good I am. I'm wonderful. I'm this. I'm that. I'm the other. You wouldn't want to have a conversation with Dracula, really. I don't think.
Exactly. And also, I mean, maybe not a full aristocrat, because that brings in way too much of the Marxist having reading, but someone who has money, and that wonderful quality of vampires where you go, why do you have money? Where has your money come from? You don't work. What do you produce? So that almost, Dracula is so clearly, he is coming from this aristocratic background. But I really like the vampires nowadays who have amazing clothing, and I haven't worked out how they afford it or where the money comes from, but they just appear to have
Probably
endless means.
Or just killing one person, taking their cash, and going on to the next one and killing them and taking their cash. I suppose where else would they get it from? So,
Stealing, or they've just got really good investments.
Yeah, I suppose if you're around for 500 years, you can just take your money from one bit and move it to the next.
Absolutely.
Or even just a very low interest bank account would probably do that for you.
Again, I think opportunities are myriad. And as long as you've got a good financial advisor and someone who's going to be able to fake the death certificates and the birth certificates and whatever you need to be allowed to keep being reborn, so you're not actually 500 years old, you should be all sorted.
You should just be your own. You be your own dad. You be your granddad. You be that and everything. So it's all quite good. Well, on that note, we've just sort of gone into other sort of things. It just tells us that with Dracula, you could have conversations about every single thing, and that's what's amazing about it. That we're still talking about it. 100 and what is it? 123 years later.
Yeah, my math isn't good enough to be able to work that
Yeah,
out.
yeah. But
Well, years later.
it is. It's a long time later, and we're still enjoying it. So anyway, thank you for that, Kaya. You take care of yourself, and we'll get you back on because we want to continue this conversation about some of the characters within Dracula, and then and the next time we're going to talk about Renfield, because we didn't talk about him in Mark Gatiss as Renfield, but I really do want to definitely talk about him the next time we catch up.
All right. Okay. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye bye.